So in 1907, my grandfather, John M. Newstead, uh, opened Newstead Hay and Grain, it was called back then. So what he would do is the farmers would come down Lake Street, and he had a big scale that the buckboards and all go up there and get weighed, and then they go down to the market and sell their products. So he also, that's when he bought the mules and the buckboards. And he would, back then, bagging coal was a big thing because people had these little furnaces and little heaters. And a lot of these buildings were 3, 4, 5 stories high. And they needed bagged oil and they needed ice. So that's how you got into delivering to the homes. And so that kind of evolved. At one point, he also started a moving business. And that's when he got up to 12 horses, 12 mules. So he had a number of moving vehicles or, the buckboards around to help people move. And at one point, I want to say he had 12 mules, I think it was, doing that. And he was a weight master up front. And then, as far as delivering that product, I have no idea who the people were back then. But that's the way people did business back then. There were no trucks delivering. There were no trucks, So everything was delivered by carts and so on. And then as time went on, the sons all went in different directions. So Howard went to the painting store, Armstrong Paint. My dad went to Taylor Forge and Pipe Works. And Harvey, I'm not quite sure what Harvey was doing back then. But then the war hit, and they all went in the service except Dad. He was deaf in one ear. So, like I said, Dad was working at Taylor Forge, and then Grandpa got sick. I think it was the second year of the war. He had a heart attack, and at that point, the business was just kind of wavering along. And so Dad quit his job and went back over to Newstead, and he maintained the business and kept things going until his brothers got back. And that's when they decided they wanted to keep the family business going. So that's when, my dad bought the first oil truck right before the war ended. And then they came back and they said they all wanted to work together, which is not easy for brothers a lot of time, But that's how they came back, and that's how the oil business started to go. Because as they bought a couple of trucks, they could see that coal was going away. People are trying to get into some more modern heating techniques. But up until that point, I remember when we had the coal business, they'd go in the morning and they'd fill this truck up with coal, and the driver would take it out to a site, and he had a side worker, and he'd drop them off there with a shovel, and he'd be there half a day just shoveling coal into the hoppers at a home or apartment building or whatever. So the coal business was dirty, and it was hard, and it was hard to get people to work doing that. So the oil business, as it started evolving, was a welcome change, and a good change. And from there, it's funny when you have brothers in a business, you learn their strong points and their shortfalls pretty quick as a kid. You never forget that with your brothers and sisters. And, when they got into business, I mean, even as kids, I'd be with my cousins, and we could just tell, the brothers, the differences and the, oh, I want to be like Uncle Harvey doing this. I want to be like Uncle Howard doing this. You just could pick their strong points. So, yeah, they got going, and it just in the 50s, I just remember we were living a nice life. We had a nice home, nice neighborhood. Well, I went to Catholic schools, private schools. So, I mean, it wasn't anything glamorous back then, but it was a nice life. We had a beautiful childhood, beautiful neighborhood to live in, and it was good. And, so, as time went on in the 50s, the business was going good and everything else. And then about, I'd say it was the late 50s, everybody was converting over to gas from oil. So it was good. I mean, we got a lot of what they call conversion work. People are going from their boilers to furnaces. So we did that, and but it got to a point where you could see the oil business starting to taper away. And having a service department, you had to go out and source certain product for a job. And so back then, the Honeywells and all the big manufacturers had their own sales offices and distribution centers in the city. So if you needed a part, the serviceman would go there and get it and bring it to the job site. So in the 60s, right around the 60s, the manufacturers decided they wanted to go to distribution. They wanted to get out of the inventory and all the overhead, and they wanted to start a distributorship program. So all the manufacturers kind of picked their best customers as their distributors. So back then, General Controls was very big back then in the oil business and stuff like that. So we were lucky enough to have the relationship, and that's when Neuco was born.
Father always stressed to us how it's important to help others. And this is something that he learned from his father back in the 30s with the Depression, where obviously we all know that people were in a lot of hurt and they had lost their jobs, and it was on a large scale. So Dad said that while our family was not in nearly the trouble that others were, because we still had the family business, what they did was go on a Saturday and they would bring food or whatever the organization needed, and they would actually just walk right on over to it and donate it. So that's where one of his sense of taking care of the community was very important. Grandpa was very lenient with people as far as paying their bills. He had a record book, and he kept track of it and he did not push them to pay him immediately. He knew them and knew that they would pay up at a point. And they in fact did, and he said we didn't lose any money from it. But the fact that he took the pressure off of them with that, I think, was very important.
So after the war, as the coal business transitioned to the oil business, we needed a couple servicemen to take care of that end of the business. That was the hiring of two brothers, Rufus and Gaston Smith, who came to Newstead Fuel and were trained on the equipment that you needed for oil burners. And for Newstead, it was Timken oil. They made the oil burners. So Smitty and Gat were trained by them to service their equipment, and were with us for over 40 years, and they were like family. I'm not quite sure how they got them, but they were discharged from the war at Great Lakes. They were in the Navy. And in the Navy, they worked on boilers on the ships. So they had the background that, we needed for service people back then. So they both came to work for Newstead Fuel and never left. They were from South Carolina, and they were just hard-working people. There was never any kind of, oh, well, you got this and I don't have that, and this and that. They were just like family. Anything. Like when I was in high school, I was real close to Smitty. We'd do work together. I'd go out on service jobs when they were putting in new boilers or new furnaces. And, when you're 16 years old, crawling around a dirty basement, learn how to thread pipe and do some electrical, you think it's pretty cool, And then after about a year of it, you're like, yeah, I don't want to do this for a living. An interesting thing is going through and seeing some of the names, because most of these people became oil customers. I remember coming back into business in 73, whatever it was, and I think it was 75, a fellow walked into the counter and said, is John Newstead here? And I said, no, he's not working here anymore. He's retired. And he said, well, my dad owned your grandfather $130. And on his deathbed, he said, make this debt right. And he said, I guess Grandpa, and whatever it was, or Dad, let him get through the winter on his bill to keep the house heated. And that was 45 years later. This guy walked in with a check or cash or whatever it was. I mean, you talk about the ethics back then versus today. I mean, we didn't have any record at that point. We weren't sending them notices or anything, but to come in out of the blue, and that happened a couple of times through the years, where people would come in and say, oh, my dad said this about you guys and about that, and you gave him some of this, and well, we wouldn't take anything. We said, no, I'm glad it worked out for you. But no, it's just amazing how the previous generation felt that there should be a recognition of the compensation of what took place.
My grandfather's death certificate, and he died in April of 47. And it's interesting what kinds of information you can glean from a death certificate that are just there. But this is my Uncle John reporting it, and I've never been able to figure out where he was living at that time. I couldn't find him in the census. I now know where he lived. And it looks like from here he'd had high blood pressure for a while, but that he must have had a heart attack about 3 weeks before he died. And that's something I had never known. He lived there 35 years. Wow, 35, yeah.
Looking at
It says he was born in Neustadt, Germany.